Sunday, but I should be here the rest of the year, God willing. At this time, I'll open us up with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you. Thank you for all that you do, the grace that you give us, the blessings that we receive, the families and friends that we have, and your word that we can understand, your message to us, your instructions for our life. And Lord, open us to your grace, open us to your will. In your Son's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So we'll start up again with 8:9. Dennis, can you read that? 2 Corinthians 8:9.
For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty may become rich.
So remember what we've been talking about, and I'm not like our pastor Shane will put you on the spot about what we're talking about, is the donations, the collection that he's been working on to take to Jerusalem or send to Jerusalem to the poor Christian Jews there. And so he's been talking about this, and he kind of puts in a punchline here, for we know that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so he's talking about the gift that Jesus Christ gave us. What is that gift?
Gift of life.
I'm sorry?
Gift of life.
Gift of life, gift of forgiveness, gift of salvation, gift of his life. Though he was rich, for our sakes he became poor. In what way was he rich, and what way did he become poor?
He was with God. He was in heaven. He had everything.
Yeah, so it was not a material poverty. We don't really know how poor materially he was. Probably no more poorer than anybody else at that time living in the Palestine area, living in Israel under the Romans. So he was not, as far as we can tell, exceptionally poor materially. But what Debbie got it right, he gave up the richness, the power, the glory that he had in heaven, and became incarnate, became one of us, lost all that he had in heaven to become one of us. So that through his poverty might become rich. No, I'm sorry, yet for our sakes he became poor, so that through his poverty might become rich. What's he talking about here? How did we become rich? Do we become rich materially? Spiritually. So he's again talking spiritually. God gave up his status as a son of God, been there from the beginning. And so he did not exploit his status to become one of us. He did not, in a sense, lord over us. He was definitely not the material Messiah that the Jews were looking at. He was not the military, political leader to run the Romans out and return them to the political and material wealth that they had, or when they look back at the time of Solomon. And so that's what the Jews had been looking for. But Christ brought us spiritual wealth that at the time people didn't really understand. And he did it by not exploiting his position. He did not, turn the Pharisees into pillows or salt or things like that. So he became poor, and he did it voluntarily. He did it not by compulsion, but he did it voluntarily for our sake. What does that say about God and Jesus?
He loves us.
He loves us. Exactly right. He loves us. So God so loved the world, as that verse goes. So he loved us enough to do that, to suffer being human and physically, and suffer then ultimately at the cross for us. And so that's just a one verse section. Now we'll go on to the next one, which is finish the task, which is 8:10 to 12. So Lynn, 8:10 please.
And here is my advice about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so.
And so what we see here is, again, he's trying to wrap up this business about the collection, and that actually go on for a while. What do you notice about how he phrases this?
He says something kind.
Right, he said something kind to them. He's also not commanding them. He says, this is my advice. He didn't say this is not my command. And so he's encouraging them. And like a lot of us, when we try to encourage somebody, as Debbie said, we try to be kind. Say something nice to them. And what's the old saying? You get more with sugar rather than vinegar, or whatever, however that saying goes. But he was saying that they started the process of collecting for money for the poor Christian Jews in Jerusalem. And now he's asking them to finish because they're in the process of he's hoping wrapping up this collection and sending it on. 11, please, Charmaine.
Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means.
And so a lot of times people make pledges to various charities and things like that. And so what is Paul telling them to stop doing?
Do what you said.
Yeah, do what you said. Stop foot dragging. Go ahead and pony up, you might say. A lot of people will make a pledge to, say, United Way or whatnot. And usually at some point they ask you, okay, it's time to come up with the pledge that you made. And so that's basically what he's saying here. Now finish the work. That is a command. He wants you to finish the work. No more foot dragging. But the phrase, according to your means, what does that mean to you? According to your means. Now, remember, if you can, that he'd been talking about the Macedonians that gave out of their poverty just in the verses right before this. But he's saying, according to your means.
What you can afford without suffering financially.
Exactly right. So he's saying, give what you can afford without suffering. The old way was tithe 10% of your income. You're supposed to go to the church under the old Jewish law. But what Paul is saying is something different. It's according to your means, and Lynn got it right. Give what you can without making you impoverished, making you suffer. You're not supposed to sacrifice unnecessarily when you're giving for something like this. Does that make it easier or harder to give?
Easier.
I'm sorry?
Easier.
Easier. And it allows each one of us to decide what that means. You know, people have different incomes, people have different needs, different situations, and what he's saying is give what you can without making yourself impoverished, making yourself in trouble financially. And so, to me, that makes a lot more sense. And that's basically how we should be giving too. It's not necessarily a set amount, but what we feel inclined to that doesn't cause us to take away from what we need for our families, what we need for ourselves. And we sometimes see people asking for more. You know, the previous Prime Minister in Japan, Abe, you know, Lynn's shaking her head, so she knows what I'm getting at. The guy that killed him's mother was a member of, I can't remember the name of the church, but it was the Moon Church. That was quite popular for a while, but apparently still popular in Korea and Japan. And they encouraged people to give everything, apparently. And so his mother impoverished the family by giving everything to the church. There's been other cults and things like that that seem to want people to turn everything over to the church, but clearly the Bible doesn't tell us to do that. It says in Paul's letters and elsewhere, even in the Old Testament, standard was to give a tenth, not 100%, but give a tenth. And Paul's saying give within your means. I would hope that our church, if somebody started trying to do that because they've gotten confused or something like that, that we would not accept that kind of gift. Of course, nobody's done that as far as I know. But, I think that's a very sad commentary on that church in Japan, that they would accept somebody's total inheritance. So Lynn, you must have been following that too. Is that correct? Okay, so 12, please. Joy?
For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable to the not according to what does not.
And so the Corinthians were more wealthy than others, and so and he was hoping for somewhat of proportional giving because of that. And so he's saying again, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, that is again within your means, not what one does not have. And he's not saying again to impoverish yourself in your giving to the church. Okay. Debbie, 13, please, A13.
Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality.
Equality. This is a major point that Paul's making, and actually, if you read all through the Bible, especially what Christ is talking about most of the time, it's equality. What does equality mean? What does equality mean to you?
Kind of a fairness or a balance.
Yeah. Equality means that we all should be treated the same. You know, that some people might have more, some people might have less. And what he's saying is the people that have more should help the people that have less. Do you believe that? Does it seem in some ways our country believes that?
In disasters, you see a lot of that, where people who don't even have, but because they may have suffered a disaster, they're willing to help and give out.
Yeah, I think as most things in human life, it's not a clear yes or no answer. I think there's a lot of yes in our society. We have our social programs that help people that are impoverished. We have the school system to try to educate, at least to a minimum, everybody. We have scholarships for people to be educated. We try to make the laws fair across everybody and how they're treated. But obviously, we still have a lot of inequality based on sex, race, religion, and social status. So it's a kind of a mixed picture. But there is an underlying feeling that we should treat people as a lot of people equally. You know, the courts are supposed to treat people equally. It doesn't always happen because people are sinful. But our underlying, there's a lot of yes to that question, but there's also some no. And so he's saying that we should, like Lynn said, we should have a balance. You know, the people that have more should help the people that have less. But the no answer, part of the answer, what kind of phrases do we hear about that in our society? One of the things you might look at is Biden's situation where he's planning to forgive some of the student loans. And so, in some ways, you can look at it as trying to make things more equal, taking money for some that have to give people that don't have. But what kind of pushback, what kind of phrases do we hear as a pushback for that? Because I know not everybody agrees with that.
Well, part of it, people feel it's unfair. What about the ones that paid it back?
Yeah, there's that. The other thing is, why should you take my hard-earned money and give it to that guy? You know, he knew what he was doing, or she knew what she was doing. She should have, or he should have gotten an education that was cheaper, or that would give them money to pay back. And so we hear people saying, why should I pay for them? Don't we hear that? People that don't want to pay taxes, that's often what they say is, why should I give my hard-earned money to that person? And so there's still, that's the no part of equality. You know? 14, please. Lance.
At the present time, your surplus is available for their needs, so their abundance may in turn meet your need in order that there may be equality.
So they were doing fairly well, the Corinthians, based on where they were positioned, the trade that went through there. Obviously, the people in Jerusalem were not. Jerusalem was no longer a power center, bringing their own taxes in. Their major income was actually people coming in for the festivals. And so there's a lot of poverty in that area. But in the ancient times, things could go bad fairly quickly. You know, there was some system, especially under Rome, of moving foodstuff, grain particularly around, and olive oil. But they nowhere had the ability to deal with a major famine like we can try to help out in places like Africa. We didn't have the transportation system. We didn't have the surplus. And so we don't know if what's going on in Jerusalem at this time was a famine or why things were bad for the Christian Jews there. And so what he's saying that you are doing good now, but you might not be doing good in the future, and so you should look at them maybe down the road being able to help you out when you need it. You know, as a society, isn't that how we look at some of these social programs? You know, we might support them now with our taxes, sometimes with our charity, but sometimes down the road we might need their help too. Most of us end up needing some kind of help sometime in our life. But then he's again pointing out what the underlying basis of this is equality, that we all should be treated equally. Now, Christ came for all of us. He didn't come for the men, he didn't come for the women, the good looking or the bad looking, or the young or the old, white or black. He came for all of us. And so we all have an equal ability to share in his grace. And so equality is a major underlying view of Christ's grace to us, that we all can benefit from that. We all benefit equally. Okay, back to you, Dennis. 15?
14.
15.
15. As it is written, he who gathered much will not have too much, and he who gathered little will not have too little.
Okay, this is a GT question. Anybody know where this came from? Probably it says in your commentary. This is Exodus. Exodus 16:18. And it's actually talking about God giving manna to the people. And 16:18 to 20 actually reads, and when they measured it by omer is a bushel, each one of them was supposed to have 1 omer for everybody in the tent that they were living in. He who gathered much did not have too much. He who gathered little did not have too little. And basically saying, if you had a big family, you could gather more. If you had a little family, you could gather, didn't need to gather. Each one gathered as much as he needed. And that's what he quoted here. And then Moses said to them, no one will keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, and they kept part of it until morning. But it was full of maggots and began to smell, so Moses was angry with them. So, God gave it equally, but what does human beings do? We still do that, don't we? Sometimes we gather more than we need. And many of us, that's the case. And so he's saying God gave them equally, but some people being greedy, like many of us are, if not all of us are to some degree, took too much. So what happened to it? It rotted. And so the principle basically was equality, but that the other principle was giving a portion of what one has, but not so much that it harms you, and that so that each of us can have enough, not to have a lot, but have enough. And so you might say, well, what does that translate now? Well, we, for example, our social programs give people things, our people that are on welfare and things like that, but it doesn't make them wealthy. by any stretch of the imagination. We try to give them enough, and sometimes it is not enough. But we obviously are not required to give them a lot. Does that make any sense? I think we more err on the side of not giving them enough. We have too many homeless people, for example. That's a long and very complicated discussion, which I'm not going to go into, but we try to give people enough. And we don't always match that vision, but that's what the idea is. But some people are greedy. In the ancient times, and even now, if somebody gave you a gift, there was expectation that you would return something to them, either another gift or a favor. I think that's a very much of the local culture too. It's impossible for my wife not to take something when we're invited over to somebody's house, even if they tell us not to bring anything. You know, it's just not in her genes, you might say. She cannot, you know, if we've been told by people, come over for dinner, but don't bring anything up, that's not going to work. You know, she's going to bring something, and pretty much everybody knows that. And that's a good part of the local culture, that if somebody gives you something, you're kind of expected to do something back to them. Maybe not exactly the same thing, maybe not even a material thing, maybe it's a favor. But it was expected, definitely expected in this time that Paul's writing, that if somebody gave you a gift, that you would return something to them, either another gift or some type of favor. The word for that, in some ways, is gratitude. You know, that you had a gratitude, and so. And again, it goes back to God trying to make things equal. So what's the big deal? Why is Paul going on and on and on? And why was he even doing this? You know, why was he arranging a collection for the poor Christian Jews in Jerusalem particularly? I'm sure there's poor Christians all through the area that he had been doing his missionary work. Why? What was going on? Why was Paul so interested in this collection? Why was it such a big deal with him?
I think he saw a need, but also he probably wanted the church to develop a more generous spirit.
That's the number one reason. You know, I think you're right about that. That alms giving to the poor was an important part of the piety of the Jews. That, remember, they were instructed to give to the poor. They were instructed to take care of widows, and giving alms was an important part of the piety of the Jews. And remember, Paul was a Jew. He was trained as a Jew, and so this would have been an important part of his religious beliefs, that taking care of the poor, giving alms, giving charity to those that needed it, is something God will. And so, but again, why was it specifically directed at the Jews in Jerusalem? Well, I'm going to try to answer the question, because it is complicated. You know, one thought was that he had an obligation. That he had an obligation, and he was discharging an obligation. In Galatians 2, 6 through 10, I'm not going to make you read it. He talks about meeting with the pillars apostles in the Jerusalem church, James, Peter, and John. And Paul met with them. And it was just at that time discussing his ministry to the Gentiles. And in the Galatians, Paul said that they did not add anything to his gospel, and recognized and affirmed his ministry and extended him the right hand of fellowship. They only asked to remember the poor. And so some think that this was an obligation that came out of that meeting that Paul had with the, you might say, pillar apostles of the church that were at that time still in Jerusalem. That he met with them, they affirmed his ministry, they agreed with the way he was interpreting the gospel, but asked him to remember the poor. And that can be found again in Galatians 2, 6 through 10. There was also a thought that, because remember we talked about people having an obligation to return a favor or a gift. What was the gift that he would see that he received from the Jerusalem church?
Drawn to God.
Yeah. So remember, what was he doing?
He was persecuting them.
He was persecuting them. He was persecuting them before he had his conversion on the road to Damascus. He was persecuting them. He had harmed them. And so he probably felt some obligation to do something about that they had forgiven him, and that was a gift to him. But also they had started a church. They had been remember from Acts what had happened, that when Jesus had left, they're the ones that spread the church and spread the gospel. And then Peter, then Paul, who was Saul at the time, was converted and continued that ministry. But the original ministry came from the Jerusalem Jews that became Christians. And so, again, in that returning a favor for a favor, a gift for a gift, he might have felt that he needed to give something back to them because of their forgiveness of him for his persecution of them, but also the gift of the gospel. Some think it probably was not an obligation because what he wrote in Romans. That in Romans, if you want to look it up, 15:31, he was concerned that they might not accept his gift. That if it was an obligation, a debt that he owed, it wouldn't be a problem. But this was in Romans, he talks about he was concerned that they might not accept his gift. This is 5:31. Would not find it acceptable. Why would they not find it acceptable? What was the underlying issue? Remember that he actually gone to Jerusalem to meet with those pillar apostles. What was the underlying issue, and why would they might not find it acceptable?
What was that now, Romans
5:31.
5:31?
There's no 5:31.
I'm sorry, I misread it. 15:31. Sorry, didn't put my glasses on. 15:31. So he's talking about, they might not find this collection acceptable. And so if it was not a debt and not an obligation that they felt he owed them, why would they not find it acceptable? What would accepting that collection confirm or show?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness? but that's not exactly the right answer.
Okay. Well, maybe some of them really.
What was the major issue that Paul had with Peter that he ended up working out? What was the issue that he actually had gone originally to Jerusalem to deal with? How Jewish did the Christians need to be? Did they need to be circumcised? Did they need the Gentile Jew Christians? Did they need to be circumcised? Did they need to follow the dietary laws of the Jews? And Paul had been saying no. And there had been some Christian Jews that said, yes, to be a Christian, you had to be circumcised, you had to follow the Jewish dietary laws. And this is something that Peter and Paul had butted heads about, and ultimately they agreed to follow Paul. And so they might not accept his donation to them because that would mean that they're accepting Paul's vision of what a Christian was, or could be. They didn't need to be circumcised, they didn't need to follow the Jewish dietary laws, because some of the conservative Christian Jews still felt that way. That you had to be fully Jewish to be Christian. Obviously, we don't believe that. It's not something that we require. We obviously don't follow a lot of those Old Testament laws in the sense of circumcision or the dietary laws. And so Paul's concern was that if they didn't accept it, it'd be rejecting his vision of the ministry. And if they accepted his ministry, accepted his donation, what would that say about the Gentile and Jewish church? Would they be separate or unified?
Separate. Because one would believe in.
If they accepted his donation, what would it say about the Christian and Jewish Christian church? Would they be separate or unified? They would be, by accepting his donation, they would be accepting his vision of Christianity. So what would it say? Your answer was the wrong one, by the way. So by accepting the donation, they would be accepting Paul's vision of the gospel ministry, in particular how it dealt with Gentiles, and it would unify the church. They would be unified in that vision of what it meant to be a Christian. The fourth possible motivation was felt to be that it would show to the, you might say, home church, the original church, that his ministry to the Gentiles was successful, that his ministry had borne quite a bit of fruit, that they could bring things back to them. And so that is actually what did happen. They accepted his collection. It did show, that his ministry to the Gentiles was successful, and so those are the reasons it seems that Paul's making such a big deal about this. That this was, you might say, showing his ministry was correct, and they agreed with it, and it was successful. And to some degree that he felt an obligation, maybe personally because of his previous persecution and the acceptance that he had gotten. And so this is why it's a big deal in his letters, because you might say, well, why is it such a big deal that he's sending a collection to them? We send money to different things from our church. We don't tend to make a bigger deal from one collection versus another. But he's really making a big deal about this one. This was something very important to him. Now, ultimately, as you remember from Acts, he would end up going with this collection and ultimately ended up getting imprisoned when he was there and ended up being sent to Rome. And so this is something that was very important for him. Okay, so I lost track. Who read last?
You're next.
You're next. And so, 8:16, this is a new section. This is talking about who's actually going to go pick up the money. And so, 8:16, please.
Okay, Titus sent to Corinth. I thank God who put into the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you.
And so he's now changing the subject, and he's kind of at least wrapping up this section. And where Titus had come from Corinth, he had sent Titus to see if they responded to his severe letter, the one that we don't have. And he was quite happy with the message that Titus brought back. Titus, it was said that he put in the heart of Titus the same concerns I have for you, so they actually treated him fairly well. Charmaine, 17.
For Titus, not only welcome our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative.
And so Titus was excited about going back. Obviously, he had been treated well when he was in Corinth. Paul had been concerned about how he was going to be accepted. And Titus was excited about going back to Corinth to continue the ministry there. 18, please, Joy.
And we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel.
Okay, who is this? This is a trick question. Who is this? We don't know. What obviously is, he doesn't name this person. There's probably several reasons. One is that person is going to be going along with this letter, so he's going to show up with the letter. There's probably somebody that they already knew, but it was also, if you read it, it was somebody that was not appointed by Paul. This was appointed by the churches. And so this is making it even clearer that it's not Paul and his groupies that are taking this money for their own use. This is somebody that's, was appointed by the churches that Paul is representing and not appointed by him. But he doesn't name them. It's not clear why he didn't, other than they probably knew who it was, and that the person was accompanying the letter with Titus. Sure.
Another brother was traveling with Paul and Titus, a man who was elected by the churches to also take a large financial gift to Jerusalem. Paul explained that by traveling together, there could be no suspicion, and people would know that the gift was being handled honestly. The church did not need to worry that the bearers of the collection would misuse the money. Paul used every safeguard to maintain integrity in the collection of money for the Jerusalem church. Those outside the church can view skeptically the way believers handle money in the church. Financial scandals among high-profile ministries have alerted the non-believing world to the unethical gimmicks that some Christians use. It is possible to avoid mismanagement of God's resources. Does your church or organization have a system of checks and balances that prevent wrongful behavior? Are there financial practices in your ministry that need to be reviewed? Christians must have the highest standard of financial responsibility.
So again, this is Paul he didn't name the person, but he was not somebody Paul named. It was somebody that the churches had elected. And again, as the commentary that Charmaine read, it was try to show the integrity of the collection. It was not going to line Paul's pockets. It was going to get where it was said to go. And I think I'll stop here because I promised Lance and others to be able to go. So, Joy, can you close us with prayer?
Heavenly Father, thank you again for this Bible study led by Dr. Dan. Thank you for the thoughts that Paul has presented to all of us, that we can think about human integrity, caring for others, and sharing according to our needs. Please help us to remember these lessons as we go through our daily lives. And know that this will enrich all of us as we remember and bring it to mind from time to time. Ask for your blessing on this body, on this church, on this classroom. We pray in Jesus' name.
So again, I'm going to be gone next Sunday, but I should be around for the rest of the year. Unless some great camping trip comes up or something like that. But no, don't have any plans at the moment.